I'll be reading the scriptures today, and I take my first reading. We've got two scriptures. I take my first reading out of Hebrews 11, and I'll be reading from verse 1 to 4, and it reads as follows. Now, faith is confidence that we hope for and as assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commanded for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous, when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. My second scripture comes from Genesis 4, and it's a little lengthy, so stay with me. I'm reading from verse 1 to 16. And it reads, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of God, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits from the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. But on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I do not know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be restless. You will be a restless wanderer in the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer in the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Janique. Okay, good evening, Gracepoint. It's so good to be with you tonight. Let us open in a word of prayer. Jesus, I thank you so much that we can just gather here as a family and we can just gather here as Christ followers. God, I just pray that you are here in this place tonight, Lord, and that we can just really feel your presence. Jesus, I thank you for who you are, and I just pray that during this series, Jesus, that your word is known and that we can draw closer to you. Amen. For those of you who have been at Gracepoint for the past 2 weeks, you know that we started our Faith Awakens series. So we're going to be speaking about faith and specifically what it means to us and what it means to our community. What it means to walk in faith with God as people, as God lovers. And I'm tag teaming with my dad tonight, which I'm really excited about. And we're on the second week, which is called Faith in Action. I'm going to start with a bit of a faith story that I have for you guys tonight. We were privileged enough to go away as a family to Cape Town in December. I don't know how many of you went down there, but it was packed. And my mom decided that for my dad's 50th,
Oh. Try
49.
again. No.
48. 48. For my dad's 48. That we would go paragliding, which is really exciting. And my cousins were up from America at the time, and we were super excited, my dad, myself, and my 2 cousins. So on his birthday, on the 30th of December, our faith journey started in the morning. We'd been on holiday, we'd be getting up at about 11:30 every morning, and that's my brother, we had to be there by 8:30. So that's where our faith journey started. They had faith that we would be there on time.
You can imagine how I feel where my family gives me a present for my birthday that involves me running off the edge of a cliff. It's...
Mom. Okay. So that was the first challenge. And the second faith challenge was that the car company that we were renting from didn't ask us of a picture of our family. So they gave us a Suzuki Alto. I'm not sure if any of you know what that looks like, but it's a bit bigger than a Mini Cooper. So I don't know if you know the mountainous terrain of Cape Town. So 4 of us packed into this car. My dad was driving, and we were on our way, and halfway up the hill, my mom turns to my dad and she goes, "What is that smell?" And our car started like fizzling because it couldn't handle the weight up the mountain. Not yours, all of ours. So anyway, eventually, all the holiday weight. So eventually, we get up this mountain and we get to the paragliding place. And the guy came up to my family and they gave everyone a form, and we were getting ready, and we kind of looked down and it was an indemnity form, which kind of scared us all. And then we kind of got suited up and everything, and now I'm expecting this massive parachute that's like made out of something really strong. I'm imagining these really thick cords that are going to be carrying us. And I got to the place and it was like these really thin cords. And I turned to the guy and I was like, "Where's the rest of it?" And he was like, "No, this is it." So I was like, "Well, are you sure this is it?" He was like, "Listen, I've been doing this for years, like, stop doubting me." So I was like, "Okay, that's fine." So we standing on the mountain and I'm asking this guy what happens, and he says, "You got to run and jump off a cliff." So I'm like, "Okay, that is fine, you're the professional." But it's like a mat that we have to jump off of. So it's nothing like real fancy or anything. So I'm getting ready, and I start to run. And I look at this guy and I go, "What if it doesn't pick me up?" And he was like, "You know what, Rebecca? It's all about having faith." And I jump off this cliff, and I'm just surrounded by God's beauty. I'm surrounded by the ocean in front of me. I'm surrounded by buildings, but I'm just surrounded by God's creation and what He has made. And I'm just so in awe of this beautiful country that we live in. And all it took was having a little faith in really thin strings and basically tissue paper. So I think sometimes, we got the pictures to show it, and I mean, that doesn't even do it justice. But I think sometimes God gives us things to have faith in. He gives us the Bible, He gives us family, He gives us church, things that we can see, things that we can touch, but sometimes He gives us nothing except His word. And that's kind of like what the wind was. There was not one whisper of wind that day. And it was kind of easy to doubt the fact that there wouldn't be wind. We couldn't feel it. We definitely couldn't see it. And for a day in Cape Town, that was really weird. But it's exactly like our faith with God. Sometimes He gives us everything, and He shows us, and sometimes He's just like the wind. But all you got to do is just have a little faith, and you'll have the most exquisite view.
Rebecca and I are going to be just touching on 3 points today. You can see there's a picture of Rebecca and Daniel paragliding, and not me, although it was meant to be my birthday present. But when I got there, Daniel saw that everyone else was jumping, and he said, no, he wants to go. So like a kind father, I gave him my gift and said to him, you go ahead and jump. That was after they weighed me. And and the guy said to me, listen here, there is not enough wind to carry you. So I said to him, like, just today or always, is that like forever or not? I want to speak about faith that leads to worship. It takes faith to really worship God in the way that God understands us and leads us in worship. See, worship is simply not about us, and worship isn't for us. Worship is in fact a gift that we give to someone else. Worship is for God. When we come here on a Sunday, the part of our singing is not the only worship that takes place. Our whole life is an act of worship to God. The origin of the word worship actually is the word worth. And it's because we ascribe worth to God that we want to worship Him. You see, in Revelation chapter 4, verse 11, the scripture goes, you are worthy, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. Worship is for God. When we are part of this community, the reason why you are here tonight, most of you anyway, is because you have placed some worth in God. And so when we meet together, for example, here, what you have said is this. You have said, rather than going off to Rockamama's or to movies now at 5:30 or whatever it may be, you're going, Sundays are set aside for God. Sunday is the first day of the week. And because of God's worth, because of who God is in my life, because of the worth that God holds, the value that God holds in my life, I worship Him. And so this time is set aside for God. He is worth more than anything else that might have been offered today. You see, the rest of the week, so many things happen that have our attention and have our focus and all the rest. But come Sunday, a day that is set aside by God for God, because of God's worth in our lives, we set the time aside to worship Him, to rest, to be with family, and to do whatever. We give the first day of the week of God. Because God has worth in our lives, we give God the first part of our day by praying and reading the scriptures and meditating and being quiet before God. Because God holds His worth in our lives, we worship Him. And because He holds His worth, we give of our resources and our time and of our talents to serve God. Now, for those of you here tonight who are still seeking or searching, sometimes people who are Christ followers who exhibit this faith, sometimes Christians seem a bit weird or a bit odd. And it's around this thing because Christ followers have found worth in something else. And so the Christ followers' worth is maybe not doing what everyone else might seem to do. Where people are finding worth in, fall down drunk, or worth in hoarding their money, or finding worth in tangible and worldly things. For those who are following Christ, this thing comes of the way we worship God. We're saying, this thing soon is going to be rusted and broken. This thing soon is going to lose its value. This thing over here, partying, getting drunk, falling down, doing all the rest of it. And so then when we look for people to connect with, we look for people. And part of what we're saying, just think about this. And for those of you who are one day or are looking for a partner in life, one of the things you've got to be asking is going, what is worth? What is this person? Where do they find their worth? And so if they find their worth in money or cars or houses or stuff, and if that attracts you, for those who follow Christ, their worth is not going to be found in those things ever. But the worth is found in who God is. You see, because God is the one who forgives us and loves us. And God gives us life in all its fullness. And God takes us and sends us on an adventure But it's all about God and God's worth in our lives. It's not for us. It is offering of our very best selves to God. Who has your very best self? Who have you given the very best of who you are to? But worship. And so Cain and Abel come to God. You must understand, they're like sort of the first generation. The world's a mess. Things have been turned upside down. Parents are like kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and the whole world's a bit of a disaster. First generation doesn't stop them from worshiping God. They come to God because of God's worth. And so today, before I hand back to Rebecca, when it comes to faith, the thing is this: it takes faith. One of the bravest and boldest things you will ever do in your life is surrender yourself for God's glory. To surrender your life, to give your life to God, to hand over your life to God because of who God is and because of God's worth. So how we worship God and the way we worship God and the way we live our lives, the way we live outside of these four walls speaks about how much God is worth to every one of us.
The second point of the evening is sacrifice. Faith enough to sacrifice. While preparing for this sermon, I turned to Google, just to Google what the word sacrifice actually meant. And there were 4 different meanings, if you can believe it or not. And I'm not going to read them all, but I looked at what the 4 had in common. And they all had giving up in common, meaning that you have to take something that you have and you need to give it up. I don't know how many of you have done Lent, or I don't know how many of you have decided to give something up. It is hard. It is not meant to be easy. It's not meant to be an easy sacrifice. It is meant to be difficult. Cain and Abel's sacrifice was supposed to be difficult. Sacrifice isn't easy. In Genesis 4, verse 3 to 4, I'm just going to reread that for you. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regarded Abel for his offering. The Lord had regarded Abel for his offering. What made Abel's offering so much more significant than Cain's offering? It's not like the Bible uses extravagant words to describe Abel's offering, that it looked better or tasted better, but it was better. The only way we can regard it as better is because of the fat portions. Abel gave wholly. He gave everything. While I was reading and while I was going over this, we were having dinner at my table the one night, and I turned to my parents and I was really confused as to why Cain was so harshly judged and why Abel wasn't. And my dad and my mom sent me away, and they told me to keep on reading and to look at Hebrews 4 and just kind of get a better understanding, because we take these readings and we just see it for what it is, but there's so much depth to it. And while doing all of this, I came to 2 conclusions as to what sacrifice is about. And the first that I could think of is that sacrifice is so personal. Cain bought wheat and stuff of the soil, where Abel bought flock. They are 2 completely separate things, yet they were judged the same. You see, God gives us different things to give back to Him. We don't all have the same talent. We don't all have the same time, and we don't all have the same treasure. And I can see us giving to God in 3 ways: time, talent, and treasure. There are some of us here who can give up time very easily. There are some of us here that can give up money easily. There are some of us here who can give up of our talents very easily. But that is not what counts. What counts is how much it takes away from us and how much it glorifies God. Because at the time we can feel like we're giving everything, but God's going to give it back to you 10 times more if you have the faith. If you have faith like Abel did, God will bless you. You see, some of you are CEOs and some of you are teachers. Some of you have different jobs. For a CEO, it's easier to give money, but is it easier for him to wake up 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning and go to Iputeng and give time to teach? You see, that's really giving up. That's really giving up something that is close to you and something that you wish you had more of. You see, God sees us. God sees what we're doing. God sees what we're giving. And God sees our faith. I read something the other day, and it was about someone who was tithing at church, and she was sitting, and she saw the person next to her give 200 rand, and she felt like her 20 rand meant absolutely nothing. She was judging her sacrifice on the person's sacrifice next to her. She was judging what someone else had compared to what she had. And later on, I was reading that the person next to her had 2,000 rand to give, and all she had was 20 rand to give. So it's not about how much you give. It's about how you give it. It's about what it means to you and what it means to God. Because it's not a relationship with everyone around you. It's a relationship with God, and it's a sacrifice that's coming from you. It's not a sacrifice that's coming from everyone else. Secondly, I saw that it was about the heart. It was about the heart that Cain had and the heart that Abel had, and the difference between the two. The difference between the giving heart and the difference between the heart that didn't want to give. You see, God sees right through it. God sees the way we give. You see, God knows our hearts. He knows our hearts when it's happy. He knows our hearts when they're sad. And He knows our hearts when we want to sacrifice and when we don't want to sacrifice. Let me tell you now, if you think you can hide your heart from God, you can't. If you're sitting here wanting to give and you feel like you don't want to, God sees that. God doesn't want this giving to be a chore. He doesn't want this giving to be tiring. He wants this giving to be joyous. He wants you to be happy about it. And He wants you to. I was talking to my mom about the sermon, and it seems like Abel really thought it through and the fat portions and what he gave to God. And it seemed like a passing thought for Cain. I think that our sacrifice and our heart doesn't need to be a passing thought. It needs to be intentional, because Jesus didn't die on the cross for us unintentionally. He wasn't the ultimate sacrifice because God thought it would be a really good idea. He was a sacrifice because God loved us so much that He gave His one and only Son for us. So our sacrifice needs to be the same. It needs to be personal so that we miss it. It needs to be personal enough that we feel like something has been taken, but something has been given to glorify God and to further His kingdom. It needs to be so on our heart that we are ecstatic when we're giving stuff away. We are ecstatic when we're spending time with those who aren't as fortunate as us. When that money bowl comes around, we want to be smiling and throwing money in the basket, not weeping the money going away. So it's personal, and it is about our heart. And I really want to be an Abel in a world that is full of Cains.
Lastly, I want to speak about witness, about faith when it comes to our witness. You see, at the end of the day, we can have this sense of worth when it comes to having faith in our faith that leads to this worship because of who God is. And that can ultimately lead to us wanting to give something, some form of sacrifice. But at the end of the day, you see, if our faith isn't greater than what we have within these four walls, then really, in some ways, our faith is pointless. You see, if our faith, and we can be here all night, and we can dance, and we can shout, and we can worship God and honor God because, God has worth. But if that is not translated out in the world, then it is pointless. And we have to take our faith into the workplace, into schools, onto the sports field, wherever we go. It's amazing how Abel, in that scripture, God says, by faith, Abel gave the sacrifice that was pleasing to God. And even although Abel was killed, the scripture speaks about his blood is a witness and still speaks to us today about his faith. Serving God is more than just being here on a Sunday, but we serve God by our witness out in the world. You see, actions do speak louder. Lots of Christians find that their lifestyle, especially things that they avoid, is their clearest witness. By saying no to things or not being part of things sometimes is their clearest, without even saying a word specifically, but in fact just by staying away can be an incredible witness. Staying clear of gossip, staying clear of negativity, staying clear of bad language, just by abstaining from that already speaks about this faith that is loud. You see, here it's pretty much clear and easy to stay away from bad language and gossip here on a Sunday night. But going out into the world, when we choose to distance ourselves from it, from criticism and all the rest of it, then it speaks volumes at school or at work or at varsity. Nonhlanhla works at a fast food joint. She was paid more money than she should have been paid. And they'd worked out her hours incorrectly. And she went back and gave the owner of the fast food place, their money back. And she said, I know that people are constantly watching me, so I really try to be honest and work my hardest for the Lord. That's not quoting scriptures at anyone. That's not like doing anything in terms of, showing a holy cross or doing anything like that. That is just by being honest. Sometimes it's more than that, though. Sometimes our witness calls us to be even more subtle. Nonhlanhla was speaking about how when she goes to work and that outside of work hours, or if she goes to go and pick up her shifts or whatever the case may be, she wears her "This is my church" that we have shirts here at Gracepoint, or she wears some other Christian shirt. And when she goes to work, although she can't wear it at work, she goes out of work times with a Christian shirt on or the logo or something, so that people know that even although she might not be at work while she's serving the tables, witnessing because she can't, there are other ways in which she can be subtle in her approach about her faith, and she witnesses in that way. Sometimes we've got to take it further. Sometimes when we've built up relationships with people, then eventually we start speaking to people about our witness and about our faith. And it is so important to do this. It's so important that ultimately when we have an opportunity to then speak about our faith, it's about having a positive attitude. Let me tell you something. For those, I believe this, and I know you can shout me down for being biased and being a pastor and all the rest, but hear me out in this. When people have placed their value in God more than anything else, when they worship God, when they sacrifice, when they go and they give to the poor and they help children and orphans and widows, when they make a positive contribution, even although it's a sacrifice, even although it's taking out of their time or out of their treasures, I can tell you now, I prefer hanging around with people like that because their attitude is completely different. There's an edge that they have on society and on life. They're interesting to be around because the conversation isn't just around them all the time. They're interesting to be around because they're deeper than most people, because they know what it's like to look into the eyes of a starving child. They know what it's like to be next to someone who's sick in bed. Let me tell you something. People who find worth in God, people who give of themselves, who sacrifice, people who, because of all of that, witness to me and to others, let me tell you something, have the best attitude ever. I'm done with people who are moaning and groaning about the country. I'm done with people who are whining about the government and this. I want to be around people who are finding a solution. I want to be around people who are praying for our country. I want to be around people. It's interesting because people who are working in informal settlements down the road, or people who are doing good work in teaching and all the rest of it, they're actually not the ones who are whining. And just this positive attitude, this incredible a belief and hope in God is such an incredible witness. I mean, I'm wondering what it is when you and I walk out the room, what people think of us and our attitude towards life. Now, let me say this to you, friends. And I'm finishing with this. Every single one of us, if you've crossed the line of faith, you and I are called to be a witness to what God has done. Our worship and our sacrifice needs to lead to worship. We cannot be part of the secret service or the underground or anything when it comes to our faith. We cannot afford it. And God instructs us to be out there, to be the light in the world. There's this group of guys called the 1 Minute Witness, and they reckon that in a minute you can share your faith with someone and witness. And all of us are called to do that in some way. And I want to challenge you this week that your faith would lead you to witness to someone about the fact that you're in a relationship with God. So the way they work it is this, is they work on the hand with the 5 fingers, okay? It's called the 1 Minute Witness. The first thing, just quickly, is do you have permission? Is there anything worse than a person slapping someone over their head with their Bible and just like vomiting God all over people? You know, because it normally comes across judgmental, it normally comes around critical, it normally comes like seriously. But there's got to be a thing where you build relationship where there's almost like where this person gives you permission in that moment to share your faith. So, and God sets up those moments in the most miraculous ways. Then the first is what we call BC, or before Christ. Once their permission has been, you've got this moment which you feel that you can, tell the person what your life was like before Christ. You know, this is the way my life went. This is what my life was like. I felt that there was no real purpose. I felt that, or I'd come to the end of my thing. I was messing around, man. I was just, involved in sin like you just don't want to know. I was throwing my life away. My life before Christ. Let me just paint a picture of what my life was. I felt lost. I felt directionless, whatever it may be. The third is what we call the turning point. Then to start telling people, what was the turning point in your life? Well, you see, I went to church on Sunday and there was this worship. Or I was watching a YouTube, or someone sent me a tweet or a quote, or something happened. I got to this place. And let me tell you about the turning point in my life. Then the fourth is AD. What happened once you met God? Now tell us what your life is like now. Now that I've met Christ, now that I went through the turning point, let me tell you a bit about what God has done for me. And let me tell you, all of us have got the story of what our life was like before Christ, what the turning point was, and what it was like. And if you haven't got that figured out yet, spend some time thinking about it. Write it down. Write down your life story so that ultimately God can use you to witness. And then lastly, to say to them, if I had never met Jesus, this is where I think my life would have gone. Permission, before Christ, turning point, my life after Christ, I met Christ. And if I'd never met Jesus, let me tell you what my life would have been like. We are called to witness in faith, and it takes faith to witness. The question always is for the next generation, as I finish, what is your life and what are people going to be saying? What are our children and what are our children's children going to be saying when it comes to our generation? Are they going to see us as men and women of faith who stood up and who really counted? Or are we going to be seen as a bunch of spineless people who weren't prepared to be bold about their faith, who weren't prepared to take God on in any way and trust God and believe God for healing, for our nation, for our lives, to really believe God for life, to really believe God for opportunities to be in the business world or career, to believe God that He has something specific chosen for us, to really believe God that there is a man or a woman out there that you will connect with and that you will meet one day who loves God and who honors God, to really believe God for our country, for the future of our country, that we are men and women of faith going forward, believing God and trusting God for amazing things.